Welcome. Such a joy to have you all here. I hope those of you that were able to attend the teaching last week with Venerable Sompton really had a lot of opportunity to glean the wisdom of her teachings. Such a precious teacher, and we're hoping to have her come back and give some more teachings. As I sit here, I remember 2 weeks ago trying to sit here and we had a blackout, so we had to improvise and run off battery with a little LED light. So here we are, much better lighting, and hopefully everything is flowing well. And welcome. I see a few new names here. We've been working through this text by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, How to Practice, and incredible text that is really written for a Western mind to grasp and engage with the Four Noble Truths. And so we've been working our way through. We've gotten through the first three Noble Truths. We're on the Noble Eightfold path. We're into the wisdom section, the recognition of the ultimate nature of self and reality, the actual liberation itself is available to all of us. And on Sunday, we had our retreat. So those of you who are new, what we've been doing is having our teachings on Wednesday, having daily practice in our community. We even have a recorded one, and just working through this text. And once a month, we do a little deeper dive. So we have a little half-day retreat. And so each month we get a chance to do that. So many of you were able to attend on Sunday, and we really got into the nature of emptiness, the ultimate nature of reality, and had some opportunity to really work with that. So we are now going to continue that process. We're in wisdom, we're at the middle way, and the importance of bringing an analytical mind to examining the nature of self and phenomenon. And again, this is the liberation, the source of all mental and emotional suffering. The source of samsara is this confusion, this misperception, this grasping the self in a way that doesn't exist. That creates all of this. And so we've been unpacking that. So those of you just joining, we're kind of a little further down the road, but I think tonight's teaching will be just very appropriate and practical even for anyone who hasn't been in the text previous. Okay, and the way we've been doing this is we read some of the text and we give some commentary. I'll see if I can pop that up on the screen here. We have a new system here with a new camera, so it uses a lot of resources. It just takes a little longer to have everything pop up, but hopefully it's much better audio and visual. Okay, so here we are, chapter 9. Now this is out of the text, How to Practice, by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. And we're at this section here on the middle way. The need for both concentration and wisdom. So this is really the Buddha's unique approach that really found the path of awakening. It was combining shamatha with wisdom. Buddhist texts tell us that upon realizing emptiness, the illusion of inherent existence weakens, but this is unlikely after a single brief realization. If you've not attained one-pointed concentration, calm abiding of the mind, that's the shamatha practice. Well, if you have not attained one-pointed concentration, you cannot use mere understanding of emptiness to uproot the illusion of inherent existence. Rather, you need to engage in analysis again and again, through concentrated meditation. Your mind will become strong, deep, stable, and capable of one-pointed concentration on emptiness, which gradually works to diminish grosser levels of the misperception of reality. So this is the method here. This is the reason why the Buddhist sutras, as well as the three lower tantras, all say that calm abiding, concentrated meditation, shamatha, is a prerequisite for special insight, wisdom, the wisdom to recognize and experience the nature of reality. The stabilizing meditation used in calm abiding and the analytical meditation used in special insight are not differentiated by the objects of meditation. Both could have either emptiness or conventional phenomena as their focus, so it could be the same focus. The difference is that observing emptiness from a state of calm abiding requires physical and mental suppleness induced through stabilizing meditation on emptiness. Whereas special insight, observing emptiness, additionally involves physical and mental suppleness induced by analytical meditation with respect to emptiness. Getting pretty subtle here. That degree of suppleness can only be gained after attaining the easier level of suppleness produced by stabilizing meditation. Therefore, you need to achieve calm abiding before special insight. So essentially what's being said here is a lot of people will meditate on emptiness. Vipassana is a very big thing here in the West. Vipassana means insight meditation, and it's valuable and it's helpful, and we can get a taste of things. And but what's being said here is that without the stability of mind, without having achieved shamatha, this stability of mind, we can't really saturate those realizations within our mind stream to really uproot the misperceptions. In other words, we do some meditation, we get a little taste, and we might even be able to sort of reach this non-dual experience. But after meditation, everything pops back to normal, and I still have mental afflictions, and my mind stream hasn't been altered in a way that's in any way permanent, not in any sense. Not that anything's permanent, but we haven't altered it in a way that's going to be progressively towards the realization. Just going to have these little insights. So those little insights are good, they're meaningful, but what's being said here is really to uproot, to achieve enlightenment, to eliminate samsara itself. Well, we're going to need that mental stability that we achieve through shamatha. So therefore, you need to achieve calm abiding before special insight. So that was the big innovation the Buddha had, was to go to this combination of calm abiding, shamatha, and in that state then pick up the vipassana, the insight meditation, the wisdom meditations. And then as the realizations come, the stability of being able to hold them, to saturate your consciousness with them, to sit with them, to let it just break down. That was the big innovation of the Buddha. So through calm abiding, although calm abiding could be achieved through taking emptiness as an object, this is only for practitioners who have already understood emptiness. Usually, however, practitioners first achieve one-pointed meditation and then gain the view of emptiness through reasoned analysis. So he's just making a point that actually you could use emptiness as an object. And by that, to achieve shamatha, to achieve this mental stability, we have one object that we meditate on. So it might be the breath, it might be awareness itself, the object is just the object of meditation. It's helping us develop that single point concentration. But he's saying that there is a way that you can combine that emptiness being that object. But that requires a certain level of understanding and insight into emptiness to be able to do that. So, advanced practice. However, the general rule of thumb is that we do shamatha practice, we cultivate that stability of mind, and then we use that stability of mind to then meditate on emptiness, vipassana, the insight meditations. Now, does that mean you can't, do analytical or really bring a vipassana practice into your daily life? No, as a matter of fact, he's going to point out right here that there is a need for this reasoning, this understanding of emptiness, the nature of phenomenon. And it's important to have throughout the day, to not just in meditation, but really start to be mindful of how we're labeling and projecting upon others in our events, and understanding that I'm arising independence upon all these causes and conditions, and John, this label John, is arising dependence upon this body in this moment talking to you, and that this is all arising dependence upon all these events. So having an ability and an understanding of that as we engage in our day is also going to help us unravel that grasping of self where things seem so permanent and independent. So he's going to point out that this is also very important, that we need to really start examining the nature of self, the nature of my experience, the nature of how I perceive others, and start unraveling and see it more accurately. So we just spent a whole afternoon on Sunday on that, and he's just going to bring to mind here how it's important to just bring into our daily life. So all Buddhist schools agree, excuse me, that the analytical reasoning process which leads to an inference, a conceptual realization, derives from basic shared direct perception. As an example, let us consider the following reasoning. So there's lots of approaches around emptiness, and there are different lineages, different schools, and can we approach it from just logic and reasoning? And the answer is, Holiness said, yeah, you can, and it's helpful. So there's nothing as, well, he's going to point this out, so I won't get too far. Let's just go along here. A plant does not inherently exist because of being a dependent arising. So it's a statement, okay? A plant does not inherently exist because of dependent arising. And for those of you who are new, when we're talking about inherent existence, we're not saying that there's no plant. We're saying that a plant doesn't exist independent and separate from anything else, from its own side. It's a dependent arising plant. Arises in dependence upon, right, soil and seeds and sun and water and nutrients and all of the conditions that give rise to a plant. And at some point it was a seed, then a sprout, and then we call it a plant. But when we really look at it, ultimately what we're going to realize is plant is a word, a concept in my mind. It's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is something I'm labeling a plant, and at some point it was a seed, then it was a sprout, then it's a plant. At which point was it any of those things? And as it withers, and it goes back into soil and so forth. That this idea of a plant being independent, separate, self-existent from its own side doesn't exist anywhere. And it's really a whole bunch of things coming together and arising, and me observing it in a particular way. And I call it a plant based on the criteria I have. But a cat or a dog, who knows what they see, but they probably don't use the word plant. And plant is really a concept in my mind. So it's a dependent arising. It means it's empty of the plantness, right? The plant is just something I'm imputing upon it, but it is phenomena. So that's what he's saying. Plant does not inherently exist. In other words, it's not independent, separate, solid, because it's a dependent arising. It arises depends upon all these things, right? So that's true or not. Let's take a look. You begin by reflecting on the fact that a plant is a dependent arising because its production depends on certain causes and conditions, such as, I guess I was ahead of ourselves here, such as seed, soil, sunlight, and water. But eventually, the reasoning process must be supported by direct perception, or it cannot stand. We can see with our eyes that plants change, they grow, mature, and finally dry up. In this sense, inference is blind, since it must eventually rely on direct perception. Now, inference depends on reasoning, which in turn rests on basic, shared, indisputable experience through direct perception. Direct perception, knowable things. Knowable objects can be divided into the obvious, the slightly obscure, and the very obscure. In order to understand a very obscure topic, it is necessary to rely on Scripture. But even for this type of inference, it is not sufficient just to cite one Scripture as validation for another. You must analyze whether. So what he's saying is, there's some things that are obvious, right? We can see the plant. There's some things that are not as obvious. We can look a little more deeply and kind of understand them. So they're a little more obscure, not as obvious, to our eyes and to our experience. And, science uncovers a lot of these things. They're a little more obscure. But there's some things that are very obscure, and they're either true or not. And he's saying, so these we're going to rely on Scripture. When he's saying Scripture isn't some divine thing, he's saying that Scripture, these teachings, are teachings that have been passed down through people who have had these direct experiences, and they're saying, I've done this, and this is what we've seen. So the Buddha did that, and he shared what he saw, what his experience was. And then other teachers and yogis and, over all these thousands of years now have been doing these practices, and they're sharing this experience, and these things are tested and so forth. And so Scripture in that sense, that these are things that have been passed down, you can cite, okay, well, so-and-so, this has been tested, and so-and-so tested. It's kind of, what do they do it in science, where peer-reviewed, right? You do your research, peer-reviewed, people check it, and see if it holds up. So, there's these teachings, and we can look at that, and okay, like karma is very obscure, and how's karma work? So we can look at those scriptures, but he's also going to say that's not enough. You're not going to, you can't just say what's written there and so-and-so's verified, it's been peer-reviewed. That's a starting point. It's a point that says, well, there's enough evidence to proceed. But his point here is going to be that we really need to find out for ourselves if this is true, if this is knowable, if it holds up. And again, you'll hear me say this every time, is Buddhism is not built upon blind faith. It's either true or it's not true. And the point is to investigate. So this one is saying here, for these obscure things that are hard to know, you can't see it with the naked eye, don't have direct experience, we're going to need to rely upon these peer-reviewed scriptures, right, that have been passed down, and as a starting point. We can cite, okay, this makes sense, and this was said here, this was said here, and we compare these things. So you can't just cite the scriptures, well, it's in the book, so therefore it's true. That's not going to hold up. You must analyze whether there are any internal contradictions among scriptures on that topic. Okay, so again, looking at the peer review stuff. And are there some contradictions here among scriptures on that topic? So we look at that topic, and this school says that, and this teacher says that. Now, you know, what are the conflicts or contradictions? There is any contradiction between what the scripture says about that topic and what is evident in direct perception. So it might say something, but you know, we don't perceive it to be that way. That's not necessarily makes it invalid. It just, you know, we're investigating this. You know, karma, for example, it's hard to have direct perception. There is any contradiction between what the scripture says about that topic and what can be understood through basic inference derived by reasoning. Okay, so that's more doable. So there's things like karma, for example. Again, very obscure, hard to know karma, right? We can read about it, we can learn about it, but can we kind of compare what's been said with what we can reason about karma, that we can infer, well, if this is true, then that's true, and we can work our way through it. This is why debate is so critically important in the monasteries and Buddhist teachings and so forth, is to really take this through logic and reasoning. And so we can go pretty far with a lot of inference and a lot of logic and reasoning. That's how, you know, most of science is built on. We have hypothesis, and you think about it, you apply it, you test. So these are 3 points that he said, you know, here's some things to start your investigation of the very obscure. So even in these very obscure cases, based on scripture, analysis is needed. Buddha set out 4 steps for establishing reliability. And in each of these, it's important to understand the process. There's this process that we engage in. And there's a depth to it. So, for example, those of you here today, you're at a Dharma teaching, went to a Buddhist teaching. Well, there's some interest. And so maybe you have studied some Buddhism, maybe not. Some people have for a while. And, you know, there's different schools of Buddhism, but, you know, you got interested. And so then we start with what's the Four Noble Truths, what's the teachings, what's the doctrine. But as we get into it, what we're going to find is more and more realizations and subtlety will come out of these things. So here's this things that we rely upon. How do we establish reliability? So number 1, do not rely on just the person, but rely upon the doctrine. So for example, some teachers are not very pure teachers. You know, some teachers are not even very good teachers. Some people are very good teachers, but maybe their ethics are not very good. And so, and then, you know, do I just trust the teacher, or do I really focus more on the teaching? And so here it's saying don't rely just on the person, but let's rely on the teaching. Okay, so I want to examine the teaching. Some teachers may not be very good, but they're ethical and they're providing the path of awakening. And so, but they may make some mistakes here and there. So, so important to really check these things out. So, so what's being taught? So that's going to be more important than the teacher. With respect to the doctrine, these teachings do not rely just on the words, but rely upon their meaning. And this is, you know, really gets to this process of parsing out what's the essence of this meaning that's being shared. And a lot of people get very literal about things. And in Buddhist teachings, you're going to find that A, it was in a different language, and, it comes here and we can read in English. English has been translated, in my case, much of this Tibetan, that's my background. Different translations will use different English words, and they're trying to capture the meaning. And so even the words in certain verses will be different words in different. We might grasp it in a different way. So we really want to know what the meaning is, and herein lies the importance to having, hopefully, qualified teachers. We can take, one of my teachers, he can take just a paragraph. You can give a month teaching on that because he's unpacking the nuances of what they mean. So the words are there, but what's the meaning? What are they really conveying? So that's going to be more important. So not just the person, but the teaching, not just the teaching, but the meaning. With respect to the meaning, do not rely just on meaning requiring interpretation, but rely on meaning that is definitive. So really get into a definitive meaning of this teaching. Really get to what's being shared here. It's clear and definitive. Okay. So I think that makes sense. Not just interpretation, but really definitive. What's this really saying? And then fourth, with respect to the definitive meaning, do not rely on just dualistic understanding, but rely on the wisdom of direct perception of the truth. And so you can see that there's this process, this layer that reveals itself as we engage in this path. And the invitation here is that we need to start where we are. We start where we are. We read a book, we had teaching, and that's the entry point. And at that point, we want to understand, well, what's this mean? And then we seek some guidance, and we want to really understand its essence. We want to understand its real definitive, what's it really ultimately saying. And as we explore that, part of this is analytical, and part of this is process of your direct experience. But ultimately, we want to get to that direct experience and rely on the wisdom of direct perception of the truth. So my direct perception, which can be beyond concept, beyond dualistic, mind, conceptual mind, that we have direct experience. So in this way, through meditation, through teachings, through practice, there's things that are knowable, right? That we can't explain because they're beyond concept, but you can know them. And so there's an evolution of ourselves as we engage in the path, but we just don't go right to, my teacher so-and-so's like this, he says this, that's the way it is. No, it's like, okay, does these teacher have these qualities, and these teachings, do they make sense? Do they hold up? Okay, let me engage, and as I engage, I'm going to get more clarity on their meaning. I'm going to engage this practice a little more. That's going to become a little more clear. I'm going to understand it better. And I'm going to go from an intellectual, interesting, philosophical concept understanding or talk to, oh, I have direct experience of this. And it reveals itself as we go down. But all through these points, we're investigating. We're not just following along. And so I want to get to this other point here and see if anyone has questions. So the Buddha also said, like gold, upon being scorched, cut, and rubbed, my word is to be adopted by monastics and scholars upon analyzing it well, not out of respect for me. And this is that very famous saying, the Buddha said, you're going to test these teachings like you would test gold, right? You don't just, somebody gives you a gold rock, gold needs to be tested, scorched, cut, rubbed, you test it. Yeah, this is real gold. The word, the teachings, well, they need to be analyzed well, not because you respect me, but because it's true or it's not. So investigate. In the process of reasoning, it is very effective to state absurd consequences of wrong views in order to overcome the potency of that wrong idea and then make a proof statement. Okay, so now he's just giving a tip on, especially within this lineage, a lot of debate, monks debate, hours a day, every day, 6 days a week actually at the monastery. And so debating back and forth, and he's just giving a point here of how we analyze and so forth. So rather, the more that you can state an absurd consequence of it just doesn't hold up, then it becomes real clear that's just insane, right? So he's just giving a little story of, when you debate, you do these back and forth. It says, when I was studying logic as a youth, a scholar once told me that both in debate with a Buddhist who asserts inherent existence, so debating about inherent existence, and in your own analytical meditation. So again, this is something you can do on our own. It's a rather soft approach to use syllogistic statement such as, that's sort of deductive reasoning. My body is without inherent existence because it is a dependent arising. So that's kind of, what we've just been talking about. The plant is dependent arising, so it doesn't inherently exist. And so he said it's kind of soft. It doesn't have that strike. However, it has more impact to use an absurd consequence, such as, it follows that my body could not be a dependent arising because it inherently exists. Because it is fundamental to Buddhism that all phenomena are dependent arising. So you're making a point, it would be, again, to him, this is just absurd, because nothing is inherently existent, right? So it's just like, water's wet. And so it wouldn't hold up. And so it just attacks the reasoning. So again, probably doesn't come out as well with Westerners thinking, but if to a Buddhist monastic, like that would be like, water's not wet. So he's just making a point that in our analytical reasoning, it's very helpful to not just do this sort of soft deductive piece, but to really attack it in a very strong way with an absurd consequence. And a little pro tip, I guess you'd call it. Pro tip. So that's a good point. We have about 8 minutes. I do want to check in with everyone. So just to cap where we're at here. So far in this text, we've understood the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering. We've been engaged in this path, the path of liberation, this Noble Eightfold path. It's been presented with the 3 higher trainings: ethics, concentration, wisdom. Wisdom is what ultimately liberates us, and how we free ourselves from this cycle of samsara, of suffering, of rebirth. And that's simply by discovering the truth of self, truth of phenomenon, understanding the empty nature of things instead of the way they appear deceptively and how we label them and then grasp on to John, and John likes things a certain way. And, I got people I like and don't like, and I create all this karma, and the karma perpetuates these habits and tendencies of how I see the world, experience people and things and events and things I like and don't like. And next thing I know, some of you might have been watching a couple guys talk last night, have all these mental and emotional thoughts and feelings, exaggerations around that. And all arising in dependence upon, a sense of self that, doesn't exist the way, I'm perceiving it, or others in the way that I'm perceiving them. And we just perpetuate this. And so Buddhism saying, well, let's start examining this self that is getting angry or frustrated or fearful, and see how I exist. And again, as we've been covering, It doesn't say there's no self. It's saying the self I'm observing is appearing to me deceptively, and I don't recognize or understand really how I exist or how others do. But there are, things, people that exist and events for this human body, and start examining more accurately how we do. And once we have that direct experience with that mind of stability, we get that realization, that non-dual experience, but with the mind that is single-pointed, that is mature and stable and present, then we can really unravel all those layers of misperception and path of awakening, liberation. The Buddha, was asked, "You God? Are you human? Are you this? Are you that?" He said, "I'm awake. Awake. I see clearly." And so this is here, the liberation itself is nothing other than recognizing the truth of who you are and this experience we're having. That's why it's so important in Holiness to go in step by step, this idea of reasoning and unpacking and checking and clarifying. And and these steps that we do to get there. And for those of you who might be joining for the first time, a huge part of getting here is our ethics, our morality, our virtuous activities of body, speech, and mind, that creates this conditioning, the fertilizer of which wisdom can grow. And so the Noble Eightfold Path is in 3 categories: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. These ethics of behavior, of the virtuous, wholesome actions of body, speech, and mind, combined with the stability of mind. It's why we meditate, have a presence of mind that can be single-pointed, present, focused, and then combining that with understanding this very interdependent experience that we're all having. It's arising independently, independence upon, all these cosmic conditions, that we are much more a stream of experience than any one thing that I'm dragging day to day. I'm arising as a stream of awareness and consciousness, moment to moment, dependence upon this body. But I'm not the same John that was here yesterday, nor if I live will I be the same one tomorrow. This is a flow of consciousness, and we don't see ourselves that way, and we don't see others that way, and we don't understand how much we impute upon others, and when we label them and how they are. And so that's the mess. And Buddhism is about unraveling the mess and seeing clearly. And so now he's just taking us through some very specific steps here. And again, we have done quite a bit on understanding the empty nature of self and phenomenon, and the distinction between inherent existence and emptiness, dependent origination. And so I can't recap all of that, but understanding that it's my misunderstanding of self and phenomena that's creating all of the karma and these afflictions and these habits of how I see people. And I believe things are the way they appear to me deceptively without that investigation. And Buddhism is an inside job. Let's look in here and see what is really the experience. So this teaching tonight is giving us a system to investigate that. And that's why it's so important to have a regular meditation practice, which he was talking about, a shamatha practice. Always have a shamatha practice. Whatever your other practices are, always have a shamatha practice. Always have a practice that is simply learning to concentrate the mind, to learn how to have single-pointed concentration. We can do other meditations, compassion meditation, loving kindness meditations, and vipassana, but always continue simply and always integrate a daily practice that is focused, single-point concentration, a shamatha practice. and you certainly do others, but have that, because that is going to be a prerequisite for liberation, really. Wow, we're already at 7:30 here at Mountain Time. So I did want to check in, see if anyone had any questions or anything that's come up during this teaching. Pause here for a moment. If like, you can raise your hand or type a question in the Q&A box. I feel fortunate that this was a pretty straightforward, a little bit, techie, but straightforward approach. And the invitation this week is to really start examining, how we label and project upon things. Our daily practice, make sure we have a shamatha practice. All right, let's take a moment here to dedicate the merit that we've accumulated together. I'm going to bring up our dedication so we can all say the same one. I'm trying to get a little more systematic in our approaches together. There we go, dedication. So just taking a moment to be in this moment. Together, we've already accumulated a great deal of merit and wisdom in our time together. And let us dedicate that. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, and I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline but increase forevermore.